Welcome back to True Crime for Sleep. If you have thoughts on this case, drop a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're riding along as detectives crack the Golden State Killer case, the slow way, then the modern way. You step into a Sacramento bedroom where drawers are spilled open and the air still feels recently disturbed. Nothing here reads like a simple burglary because the offender moved with rehearsal, not panic. You start logging the small things: shoe impressions, ligature knots, window screens, the dull pattern of prowling calls. Then the map grows, jurisdiction lines get in the way, and your case file becomes a stack of maybes. Years later, the evidence is still there, sealed in boxes under fluorescent lights, waiting for science to catch up. Deoxyribonucleic acid links the crimes, but a database match never comes because he was never in the system. So you take the gamble detectives used to avoid, convert the sample to single nucleotide polymorphisms, and build a family tree that can fail on one contaminated profile or one bad assumption. You stand there a second longer than you should because the quiet in the room is the wrong kind of quiet. It is not peaceful. It is staged. You see it in the way the dresser drawers are pulled out, not dumped, like someone searched with patience. You smell it too: stale sweat trapped in carpet, and something metallic that does not belong in a bedroom. You tell yourself it is a burglary because burglary is easier to file. Then you notice what burglars do not usually leave behind: ligatures. Not fancy ones, just practical lengths of cord and torn fabric pulled from inside the house, the kind that turns a home into a toolbox. That is your first concrete escalation, because now you are not looking at property loss. You are looking at control, and control has a personality. You move slowly, gloved hands, flashlight beams sliding across baseboards. You catch a shoe impression near the window, faint in the dust. Not a clear print, not a gift, just enough tread pattern to tell you it is athletic. You photograph it anyway because someday some lab tech is going to thank you for being annoying. Then you find the screen. It is not smashed, it is lifted and set aside like a man putting down a book he plans to pick up again. That is development number 2. It means whoever came in did not rush and did not fear being heard. So you ask the first question you always ask at scenes like this: how did he know he had time? You take statements in the hallway under that harsh porch light that makes everyone look guilty. The victim's voice keeps snagging like a record skipping. They tell you about a voice in the dark, low and steady, giving instructions like a supervisor on a job site. They tell you about dishes, a stack of dishes on their back, balanced, used like an alarm. If they move, the plates fall, and he will know. That detail lands in your notebook like a stone. Burglars want out. Predators want you to stay put. Now the case stops being a single report and becomes the start of a file. And the file is hungry. You go back to the station and do the part no one puts in television. You sit under buzzing fluorescent lights with cold coffee and you start reading old calls for service. Prowler report, dog barking at midnight, a man seen near a side yard, then gone. A hang-up phone call that comes in at 1 in the morning, then again the next night, and again. You circle those calls. You write the addresses on a legal pad, and when you lay them out, you see that they are not random. They form a shape around the attack. like someone walked the neighborhood first, the way you walk a grocery aisle before you decide what you want. Congratulations! You are not chasing an incident. You are chasing a process. The next development arrives in the form of a second report, then a third. Same kind of entry, same kind of rummaging, same type of bindings pulled from the home itself, as if he wants to leave as little behind as possible. You start comparing knots. That sounds ridiculous until you have seen enough ligatures to know that people tie the way they live. Some knots are anxious, messy, doubled over. These are clean, functional, quick. The kind of knot you tie when you have practiced in your hands, watching television, waiting for the day you can use it. That is a new escalation because it suggests he is not improvising. He is refining. You go to the evidence room, the one that smells like cardboard and old solvents. You sign out bagged cord, bagged tape, bagged pieces of torn sheet. Chain of custody is not glamorous, but it is the spine of your case. Lose it, and the defense attorney will eat you alive years later. You label, you photograph, you log. You feel like you are building a wall out of paper. Then the wall starts to shake because the calls keep coming. Another development. Victims report pre-attack phone calls, sometimes with, "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request," with a voice that says, "Nothing at all, just breathing." Just the soft click of a receiver settling back into place. You write that down too, because terror has a preamble, and preambles create patterns. You start asking dispatch for every hang-up call in the same neighborhoods. You start asking the phone company for traces, and you already know the answer. Rotary phones, shared lines, paper logs, a technician who has to physically check equipment. After the fact, it is like trying to catch smoke with a coffee filter. Still, you try, because the calls are not random. They are timed. They come before attacks, and sometimes after. Not to confess, not to explain, just to remind a house that it is not sealed. You sit with victims, and you learn the small humiliations. The way someone stops sleeping in their own bed. The way a couple starts placing chairs under doorknobs like furniture can bargain with violence. The way a man keeps a baseball bat beside him and realizes he is only holding it to feel less helpless. You nod, you take notes, you lie gently. "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." You tell them you will do everything you can because that sentence is cheaper than the truth. The truth is, you are about to go back to your desk and drown in paper. The truth is, you do not have a suspect. You have a behavior. You walk out to your car, and the night air feels too normal. Porch lights glow, sprinklers click on. A television laughs somewhere behind a curtain, like the world is not keeping up. You sit in the driver's seat and you stare at your hands on the wheel. You can still feel the layout of that bedroom in your head, like you slept there. You drive back to the station, and every street looks like a route someone could rehearse. Side streets, drainage ditches, those thin strips of dark behind houses where fences do not quite meet. You start thinking the way he thinks, and you hate yourself for it. Because it works. In the briefing room, you get a map and a box of pins. You think you are making order. What you are really doing is admitting you are afraid of chaos. You pin the attacks, you pin the prowler calls, you pin the hang-ups. Then you step back and see the ugly little truth. The points do not scatter. They cluster like mold along canals and bike paths and those long green belts that look innocent in daylight. Congratulations! You have found his exits. That is what separates a lucky criminal from a practiced one. Anyone can break in. Not everyone knows how to leave without being seen. You bring it up to your supervisor, and you watch their face do that tired thing. The part where they want to agree with you. The part where they remember budgets and politics. The part where they say, "We will talk to the other agencies." You already know what talk means. It means a phone call, a note, a meeting next week, and the offender works nights. The first coordination meeting feels like a group therapy session for people who hate feelings. Different departments, different uniforms, different ego sizes, same coffee stain on every file folder. You sit in a room and listen to the same story told in different accents. A man in a mask, a man with a flashlight, a voice that is calm, almost bored, like he is reading instructions. He ties, he stacks dishes, he threatens, he takes small things sometimes, like souvenirs that fit in a pocket. He leaves big things behind, like fear that will not. Someone calls him a burglar. Someone else calls him a rapist. You call him what he is, a predator who uses burglary as a skeleton key. Then the argument starts, because names decide funding. Burglary is property crime. Property crime gets a report number and a shrug. Sexual assault is different. Sexual assault means pressure. Pressure means mistakes. And everyone in the room is afraid their mistake will be the one on the news. So you push, gently at first. You lay out the common points. Entry through a sliding door or a window with a removed screen. Ligatures from within the home. Victims forced into compliance with improvised alarms. Pre-attack calls or pre-attack prowling. You see heads nod even when mouths stay tight. You are building a language that can cross city limits. That becomes your first real decision. You stop treating each attack like a separate storm. You start treating them like weather, patterns, fronts, a system that moves. And once you do that, you have to accept the other half. Weather does not care about your schedule. You request patrol saturation near the clusters. You push for officers to sit in the dark near those canal paths. You ask for marked units and unmarked units, and you know what happens next. The public sees patrol cars and thinks you have it handled. The offender sees patrol cars and learns your rhythm. He starts adjusting. It is not "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." Fast enough to look like instinct. Slow enough to look like confidence. Either way, it tells you the same thing. He is watching you watch him. You learn that the hard way, because the next calls come in right after a patrol surge. Not in the same blocks you just flooded with black and whites. In the next jurisdiction over, where the radio chatter sounds unfamiliar, where the officers do not know the canal path dead ends behind a school, where your pins have not reached yet. You sit in another briefing room, and the wall map gets uglier. More pins, more string, more arguments about whether your guy is even their guy, because pride is cheaper than coordination, and it costs more in the end. You start doing the only thing that works when agencies do not. You build a private atlas in your head. You track him by what he needs, not by what he takes. You look for neighborhoods built fast with similar floor plans and similar fences. You look for sliding glass doors that face greenbelts. You look for backyards that connect like loose teeth, and you look for the human pattern, the kind no map can hold. New couples, young families, homes where the curtains are still too thin. Because he is not hunting money, he is hunting access. And access has a smell. It smells like routine. You get your first decent description, and it feels like a cruel joke. A man, white, average build, maybe early 20s, maybe late 20s. Hair that is there, then gone under a mask. Eyes that could belong to anyone in a grocery store line. Congratulations, you now have a suspect who is statistically half the county. So you do what you always do when the description fails. You go back to the scene mechanics. Screens removed, not cut, not torn, removed cleanly and placed nearby, sometimes propped against a fence, like he is keeping his own house in order. That detail keeps returning, and it nags at you, because it implies hands that do not shake, hands that have done this before, hands that might also handle tools, or weapons, or a steering wheel for a living. You start collecting shoe impressions more aggressively. You photograph soles in dirt, in flower beds, in the fine dust of garages. You compare tread patterns like you are reading palm lines. You get brands. You get sizes. You get nothing you can arrest, but you get consistency. In more than one scene, you see the same general athletic tread, and the size keeps landing around the same range. Large enough to make you picture a man who moves with reach. Not huge, not small. Built to run. Then comes the part that makes your skin prickle, because it is so petty. He takes things, but not the things a burglar wants. Loose change? Yes. Jewelry? Sometimes. But also a single earring, a class ring, a photograph, a small object from a drawer you would not bother opening if you were in a hurry. You hear victims describe it later, their faces pinched with confusion. They will say, "He took my daughter's coin collection, but left the television. He took my cufflinks, but left the cash." And you have to explain gently that it is not about value. It is about proof. Proof that he was there. Proof that he can return. You push the idea in meetings, and it lands badly with certain people. They want to believe he is motivated by need. Need you can predict. Need you can starve out. But this is appetite. And appetite is patient. You get another detail, and you hate it on principle. He uses what is in the house. He ties with shoelaces, towels, cords from irons, and strips torn from sheets. That means he brings less. Less means fewer chances to drop evidence. Less means you will be stuck with fingerprints that smear and footprints that wash away. But it also means something else. It means he wants the victims to know the house betrayed them. Your own linens become your restraints. Your own kitchen becomes the source of the plates he stacks. Your own phone becomes the instrument of his breathing. A home is supposed to be a boundary. He turns it into a collaborator. You start pushing for practical advice to the public, the kind that does not make headlines. Lock screens, trim shrubs, change sliding door latches, put dowels in tracks. But the public does what the public always does. They buy a gun and forget to lock the window. They install a deadbolt and keep the garage door open. They call in every strange car until the dispatcher's voice turns flat with fatigue. And in the middle of all that noise, he stays quiet. He does not do dramatic taunts on camera. He does not give you a manifesto. He just keeps showing up. And sometimes he calls first. The hang-ups change. They become more deliberate, more frequent. Sometimes a whisper, sometimes just breathing, sometimes a voice that says one sentence and then clicks away. You log it. You log all of it. Date, time, number if you can get it, and the victim's report of what the voice sounded like. And you start to notice something that makes you feel both smarter and sicker. Some of those calls happen when he is not close. They happen when he is traveling. Like a man checking a lock twice before he leaves town, he is not only stalking people, he is managing fear as a resource. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. So you stop thinking of fear as an aftermath and start treating it like part of the method. If he can make a neighborhood flinch on command, he can move through it like he owns it. You put that in your notes, because your notes are the only place he stays still. Then you do the part that feels embarrassing, even though it saves lives. You sit with a stack of reports, and you build a pre-attack timeline. Not just the night of the assault. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Days before, the small rehearsals that look harmless until they do not. You line up the prowler calls, the barking dogs, the missing screens, and the weird little complaints about gates left ajar. You add the hang-up calls like punctuation marks, because he seems to like commas more than periods. Then, you mark the nights when nothing happens, because nothing is also a choice. You start seeing it, the way you see a magic trick once you know where to look. First comes the neighborhood visit, slow and ordinary, like a man looking for a lost dog. Then comes the testing, a screen lifted, a gate unlatched, a window tried once and left alone. Then comes the call, not always, but often enough to feel like I had it. Then comes the actual entry, and by then the house is already his in his head. You bring that timeline into the next meeting, and you watch the room stiffen. Because a timeline like that is an admission. It says he is not hunting blind. It says he is practicing on your city, like it is a piano, and he knows the song. Someone asks you what to do with it practically, and you hate the answer because it is boring. You tell them to treat prowler calls like pre-assaults, not like annoyances. You tell them to dust lifted screens for prints, even when the homeowner shrugs. You tell them to document shoe impressions even when they look like nothing. You tell them to take reports that feel petty, because petty is where he lives. That is the difference between a case and a stack of stories. Then bureaucracy does what it always does. It asks for proof before it pays for prevention. You do not have proof. You have pattern recognition and a stomachache. So you make do with what you can control. You start building an informal list of addresses that keep showing up near attacks. Corner houses, houses backing to a green belt, houses near a drainage canal that runs like a dark hallway through the neighborhood. You drive them at night, windows cracked, radio low, trying to hear what you cannot. The streets look clean, suburban, almost embarrassed to be involved. Sprinklers tick. Wind moves through hedges like quiet gossip. And you keep thinking the same thought over and over. The thought that does not help but will not leave. He is out here with you, not in a dramatic way, not lurking behind every tree, but somewhere in the grid, moving when you do not look. The first big reality check comes when you try to formalize coordination. You request that neighboring agencies share reports, share composites, share evidence summaries, and you learn the ugly truth about jurisdiction. It is not a line on a map. It is an identity. Every department has its own pride, its own file cabinets, its own way of being right. So, the sharing happens slowly, in pieces, in photocopies that arrive with coffee stains. You get a few key details that match, and a dozen that do not. One victim says he smelled like cigarettes. Another says no smell at all. One says his voice was young. Another says it sounded older. The mask turns every face into a rumor. The darkness turns every memory into an argument. And the offender knows this. Even if he cannot explain it in words, he knows that survivors will give you a fog, not a portrait. Congratulations, you are building a puzzle out of smoke. Still, there are pieces that stay solid. His entry habits keep repeating. His preference for backyards and side gates keeps repeating. The way he uses ligatures from inside the home keeps repeating. And the way he controls the scene with that awful calm keeps repeating. You begin to suspect something that feels almost rude to say out loud. He might have training, not in some glamorous assassin way, in a practical way, like someone who has learned how to move through other people's spaces, someone who knows how to listen, how to wait, how to keep his breathing even, someone who understands response times and how patrol cars drift like tides. You float it in a meeting. Carefully. The room goes quiet in that defensive way because law enforcement does not like looking in mirrors. If you say he might be one of you, even tangentially, you make enemies. But the evidence does not care about your friendships. You push for more detailed documentation of knots, bindings, and how victims were moved. Not because you think the knot will name him, because the knot will describe him. A knot is a signature you can touch. A knot is muscle memory made visible. You get one of the evidence techs to start a small collection of ligature photographs, scaled, labeled, cross-referenced. It feels obsessive, and it is. Obsession is what the job becomes when the offender keeps winning. Then the pattern learns to travel. You feel it first as a phone call from a neighboring agency, casual in tone, tense underneath. They have an assault that looks like yours. They have a screen lifted and set aside. They have plates used as an alarm. They have ligatures pulled from inside the home. And the victims describe the same steady voice, the same insistence on control. You drive out to meet them, and the geography hits you like cold water. This is not just your city anymore. This is a man who can commute. You sit with their detectives, and you trade notes like contraband. You compare timelines, and you see the spaces between attacks stretching. He is spacing them out, either by choice or by circumstance. Maybe he moved. Maybe his job changed. Maybe he is learning that police attention fades if he waits long enough. That is the thing about public fear. It gets tired. It wants to go back to normal, even if normal is a lie. You bring the new linkage back to your own unit, and you update the map. More pins, more strings, a wider stain. The canals and bike paths keep showing up like veins. And now you see something else. The clusters are not random blobs. They sit near on ramps near routes that let a man get away fast and disappear into another town. You start treating highways like part of the crime scene. Not the asphalt itself, but the access it provides. You ask traffic units for any reports of suspicious vehicles near greenbelts late at night. You get back what you always get: a flood of nothing punctuated by too much. Dozens of people saw a car. Nobody saw the same car. The human brain is not a camera. It is a storyteller, and it loves filling gaps. So you adjust again. You focus on what does not change. Shoe impressions, when you can find them. The way screens are removed, clean and careful. The way victims report being told repeatedly to be quiet, to cooperate, to do exactly as instructed. Then comes another development, and it is the kind that makes your stomach drop because it is so small. A survivor mentions hearing him move through the house like he knew it, not just confident, but familiar. He did not bump into furniture. He did not open the wrong door first. He moved straight to the bedrooms, straight to the phone line, straight to the control points. You have heard versions of that before, but this time you take it literally because you have the pre-attack timeline now. You consider the possibility that he is entering houses when nobody is home, not to steal, to learn, to locate bedrooms, to unlock windows, to hide ligatures, to find where the flashlight will reflect off a mirror. It is a violation that goes beyond the assault. It means the home could have been compromised days earlier. Like a trap set quietly, you start asking victims new questions, questions that make them look at you like you are trying to hurt them. Did anything feel moved before the night of the attack? Was a gate found open? Was a screen loose? Was a window latch odd? Did the dog act strange? Sometimes they say yes, and they had dismissed it. Sometimes they say no, and you can hear them wondering if they missed it. You hate making them doubt their own memory, but you hate letting him keep using that advantage more. You push for community alerts, the kind that tell people to report, "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." Anything that looks like casing, even if it feels embarrassing. You tell them to treat a loose screen like a stranger on the porch. You tell them to call in the second they see it, not the next morning, because your offender does not need long. He needs one quiet minute and one neighbor who assumes it is probably fine. The flyers go out and the phones light up. And now you get the other side of public help, the side that tastes like aspirin. Every raccoon becomes a prowler. Every teenager becomes a suspect. Every unfamiliar sedan becomes the offender's getaway car, until proven otherwise. You try to separate signal from noise, the way you try to hear one voice at a crowded bar. But the offender loves noise. Noise gives him cover, and it gives you ulcers. You start building a working checklist because your brain is tired of improvising. Back fence line, side gate latch, sliding door track, screen removal points, footwear impressions, even partial, any ligature material missing from the home, any displaced items that look staged, not searched. And you add one line, the one that makes rookies swallow hard. Any evidence of prior entry before the night of the assault. You push patrol units to treat those calls like active threats. You ask them to stop shrugging at open gates. You ask them to write the report even when the homeowner laughs it off, because laughter is just denial with better lighting. Then you run straight into the oldest obstacle in policing: time. Not the philosophical kind, the simple kind, the kind measured in minutes on a radio clock. A prowler call comes in at 1:20. A unit is tied up on a domestic. Another is across town on a drunk driver. Response is 12 minutes, then 16, then too late. You arrive, and all you have is a fence still vibrating from someone going over it. You shine a light into a backyard, and you see nothing but wet grass. And you know in your bones that he is already moving, probably through a green belt, probably toward a canal path, probably laughing without making a sound. The next case lands in your lap with an extra detail, the kind that turns your mouth dry. The victim reports he said something personal. Not their name, not a fact from a file. Something small, like he knew who slept where and which room belonged to which child. You do not say it out loud, not yet, but you feel the implications settle in your gut. He had been inside before, not during the attack, before. Daylight, maybe, or evening, when the family was at the store. You go back to the house in the afternoon and walk it like a burglar would. You check the fence lines, and you find the spot where boards bow outward, a perfect little gap hidden behind vines. You check the sliding door, and you see the latch is cheap, the kind that lies. You look at the window locks, and you find one that does not quite seat, and you realize he does not need to break anything. He just needs to notice what people stop noticing. Congratulations, you are hunting a man whose talent is attention. You take this back to the task force meetings, and you frame it carefully. If he is entering before, he is caching information. If he is caching information, he is not impulsive. If he is not impulsive, he can wait out patrol surges. He can let the community meetings burn themselves out. And then he can return when everyone goes back to sleeping like they used to. You push for stakeouts, quiet ones, in the clusters. You want unmarked units near the canals. You want plainclothes near the green belts. You want officers sitting in darkness, listening to sprinklers, fighting boredom. Because boredom is where this offender hides. And you learn another reality check. Stakeouts are only as good as the patience of the people running them. A car sitting too long draws attention. A neighbor sees it, calls it in, and now you are explaining yourself to the public. An officer shifts in a seat, steps out to stretch, and that is the moment a figure moves behind a hedge. You start hearing phrases like negative contact, nothing observed, area checked, and you start realizing you are trying to catch a man who has made not being seen his only religion. Then he proves it again. An attack comes in close to where you had units posted, not on the same street, but within the same web of backyards. He slipped between the holes in your net because your net is made of shift schedules. You walk into the scene after the fact, and the air feels heavy with that specific stale terror. The victim gives a statement, voice small, eyes fixed on a corner of the room. They describe hearing him outside first, not a crash, a soft sound, like a gate latch turning slowly, then the whisper of a screen being eased away, not forced. Then the pause, a long pause, like he stood in the dark listening to the house breathe. You write it down because pauses are part of the method. He is not only entering, he is calibrating, and you think about what that means for your timeline. If he is listening before he moves, then his confidence is not bravery, it is certainty. He is certain he has time. You keep circling back to the same question. How does he know? You start looking at patrol routes like the offender would, not the official routes on paper. The real routes, the lazy routes, the routes where officers park under the same tree every night. You do it because you have seen it, because you have done it yourself on slow nights. And you do not like what you see. Patterns, predictability, a schedule that a patient prowler could memorize. So you tell patrol to vary. You tell them to stop parking in the obvious spots. You tell them to run silent, then run visible, then silent again. And you watch the offender adapt, because predators adapt the way water does. They take the shape of whatever container you give them. Another development hits your desk, and it is pure cruelty disguised as technology. The offender makes phone calls again, but now they are weirder. Not just hang-ups. Calls with a voice that says something obscene, then goes dead. Calls to a victim months later, like he kept their number as a souvenir. It is not about communication. It is about ownership. He wants them to know he can still reach through the wall. You try to trace them, and you run into the same wall of the era. Payphones, operator limitations, paper records that arrive too late to matter. It is like asking a horse to outrun a car. You start working with what you can control, which is mostly documentation. You standardize the report language across agencies as much as anyone will allow. You start pushing details into a shared packet, entry method, findings, verbalizations, staging. You try to make a single offender feel like a single offender on paper, because on paper is where funding decisions are made. And you are learning that the case is not just detective work. It is politics with fingerprints. You get the composite refined, and it is still useless in the way a ghost sketch is useless. It looks like every man you have ever watched pump gas at midnight. The eyes are generic. The jawline is a guess. The hair is a rumor. But you pin it up anyway because hope is a required uniform item. And then the map spreads again. Another jurisdiction calls. Same entry, same control, same dish trick. Now you are no longer fighting to convince people it is connected. You are fighting to keep up with the fact that it is connected everywhere. The offender is moving like a commuter, not like a drifter. He is choosing neighborhoods that look alike because sameness makes him fast. If every tract house has the same hallway, he can move through it in the dark. If every sliding door has the same cheap latch, he can defeat it by touch. If every backyard connects to a green belt, he can vanish without a car door ever slamming. And that gives you another working hypothesis, one that makes your colleagues roll their eyes. He might be using a bicycle. It sounds almost quaint until you picture it. A man rolling silent down a canal path. No engine noise, no headlights, just rubber on pavement and a shadow that does not belong. You start collecting reports of stolen bikes, bikes found abandoned near greenbelts. You ask victims if they heard a chain, a click, a faint metallic sound. Some say yes, some say no. And you hate how fragile your case is, how dependent it is on what a terrified person can remember. Then you get one of those details that feels like the offender is talking directly to you. A victim reports he mentioned police, not in a vague way, in a way that suggests he knows what you are doing. He talks about patrol, about response time, about how long it will take. You sit with that and you feel something settle over the room, like dust. Either he is guessing and he is lucky, or he knows And if he knows, you have a problem that is not just criminal. It is institutional. You start looking at people, not suspects yet, but categories. Security guards, police cadets, anyone trained to move quietly, to control others, to understand how men with badges behave. You do it quietly, because saying it too loud gets you labeled paranoid. But you have earned a little paranoia. Paranoia is just pattern recognition after midnight. One night, you ride along with a patrol unit in a hot zone. You sit in the passenger seat, window down, smelling cut grass and exhaust. The officer is bored, and boredom makes him honest. He tells you the neighborhood is jumpy. He tells you they call in everything. He tells you half of them have guns now. He tells you the other half sleep in shifts. You stare out at the houses, and you see curtains that are too still. You see porch lights left on like small prayers. You see a man walking his dog at 1 a.m, not because he loves the dog, because he wants to look like he is doing something. You realize the offender has changed the shape of community life. People do not just lock doors, they change their routines. They stop jogging at dawn. They stop leaving windows open. They start suspecting each other. And you also realize something else. If the offender is watching, he is enjoying the power to reshape behavior. That is not a side effect. That is part of the payoff. Then comes the pivot you have been dreading, the one that turns a case from monstrous to historic. The call comes in from down south, and at first, you think it is a different file, different county, different detectives, different tone. They talk about a couple attacked in their home, tied up, ransacked, and then murdered. You feel your body go cold in a way coffee cannot fix, because you have been living with the assumption that survival is part of his script. You have been telling yourself he is a rapist, a burglar, a controller. Now you are being told the control ended in death. You ask for details, and the details feel familiar in the worst way. Ligatures, bindings that look practiced, a scene that feels staged, not chaotic. He took his time. He did not flee in panic after violence escalated. He stayed. And staying is a choice. You drive to the scene because you cannot not drive to the scene. You walk in, and the quiet is different than before. There is no survivor voice in the hallway. There is no shaking hand holding a blanket closed. There is just the house and the weight of what happened inside it. You smell that metallic note again, stronger now. Blood does, I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Not just stain, it rewrites the whole room. It climbs into the curtains. It dries dark on the carpet. It tells you time has passed without permission. You keep your voice low because there is nothing to say that fixes this. You look for the old rhythm, the familiar props, the little theatrical touches you have learned to hate. And there they are, like punctuation you never wanted to recognize. Bindings. The scene is still organized in that sickening way. Not tidy, not clean, but arranged by someone who needed the ending to look a certain way. You move with the evidence technician, slow and deliberate, stepping where you are told to step. The first decision is automatic now, even if nobody says it out loud. This is not only assault investigation anymore. This is homicide. And homicide changes everything about the pace. In the rapes, you had victims, living, breathing, describing a voice and a method. In homicide, you get silence and physics. You get blood spatter that does not care about anyone's feelings. You get lividity, the blood settling after death, painting a map of position. You get rigor, the stiffening that turns a body into a timestamp with bad handwriting. And you get the most brutal reality check, the one the public never sees. You cannot ask the dead, "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." So you do the next best thing. You ask the house. You ask it with light and tape and measurement. You ask it with a camera that does not blink. You start where your body wants to avoid, the bedroom, the place that should have been safest. You look at bindings first, because bindings are his handwriting. You notice how the ligatures are positioned, not just what they are made of. You notice whether they were tightened with panic or tightened with procedure. You keep thinking. If you can read the knots, you can read the man. You crouch near the bed and you see impressions in carpet where knees press down. You see the faint scuff of a shoe near the frame, like punctuation at the end. You hate how familiar that scuff looks. You follow the line of it toward the hallway because you are always looking for the path out. You find the phone, or what is left of its usefulness. You see the cord, displaced, maybe unplugged, maybe cut. It is the same old trick. Remove the victim's voice from the equation. You document it anyway, because repetition is how you prove a single offender. The evidence technician calls out measurements, and you write them down like prayers. Distance from bed to door, distance from bed to kitchen, distance from kitchen to sliding glass door. Because the layout becomes a timeline if you let it. Then you make yourself look at the blood, not as horror, as information. Blood spatter looks dramatic in movies, sure. In real life, it looks like somebody made a mistake at a paint store. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Don't get to look away, because your job is to translate it into a story the jury will believe. You start by asking the simplest question, the one that ruins sleep. Where did the first injury happen? You track stains like footprints, smaller droplets leading into heavier pooling. Directionality matters because blood does not improvise. Impact, spatter, cast off, transfer stains, it all reads like a sentence if you know grammar. You watch the tech place little markers and you realize you are watching someone subtitle a death. You want it to be one clean event, one moment, one mistake. But it is not. It is movement, struggle, control, and then silence. You note the lack of chaos in the room, not because the room is clean. It is not. Because the disorder looks chosen. Draws are pulled out again, but this time it feels like camouflage. A burglary costume pulled over a murder. Congratulations, your offender is not only escalating, he is adapting his narrative. You check the entry points, because I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. You are trying to prove how he got in, and whether he ever needed to force anything at all. You walk the perimeter with your light angled low, because shiny beams lie. You look for the soft crimes first, the ones that do not sound like breaking. A screen edge that is bowed but not torn. A latch with fresh scrape marks, thin as a fingernail. A gate that closes but does not click because somebody learned where the wood sticks. You find a sliding door with a dowel missing from the track, and you feel your jaw tighten. That dowel is not evidence, It is a lesson that got ignored. You check the ground below the window, and the dirt is too disturbed to be random. There are partial impressions, heel and toe, but the middle is smeared, not because he is sloppy, because he knows to shift weight and blur the tread. You photograph it anyway, because someday you will want to compare that blur to another blur. You tell yourself to focus on what you can collect, not what you wish you had. Inside, you follow the mess he left, and you keep noticing what he did not disturb. Family photos stay upright. A lamp stays centered on a side table. A glass on the counter is not tipped. It is simply moved. That is not panic. That is navigation. You can almost see him in your mind, moving through the house like a man who mapped it. And you hate how quickly your imagination turns into a working theory. The other detectives are quiet now, because murder makes everyone superstitious. People talk less and listen more, like the killer might be hiding in the ductwork. You ask for the call logs, and you already know what you are hoping to find. Any hang-ups, any strange calls in the days before, any neighbor who noticed a dog barking at nothing around midnight. You get the reports, and they come back with the same old problem. Plenty of weird, and nothing that points like a finger. A neighbor heard a squeak, maybe a gate. Another saw a flashlight beam sweep a fence line, then vanish. Somebody saw a man jogging late, which sounds innocent until it does not. You circle the times, and you stack them against the estimated time of the attack. It creates a window, not an answer. And windows are where he lives. The coroner gives you the early assessment, and you do that detached nod you learned years ago. Time of death is not a clock. It is a range with bruised edges. Body temperature drops on its own schedule. Rigor comes, then loosens. Like the body trying to negotiate. And lividity, that pooling of blood, tells you how long someone stayed in one position. It is clinical and it is intimate, and you never fully get used to it. You watch the scene get processed, and you keep thinking about escalation as a choice. A rapist can leave alive, because leaving alive keeps the police chasing shadows. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Murder is different because it closes doors you might have needed open later. Murder means no witness to contradict him, no voice to describe his hands. Murder also means he has crossed a line that is hard to uncross. You do not say it to the room, but you feel it, heavy and certain. If he can kill, then every future call is a potential funeral notice. You go back to your car with the smell of latex gloves still in your nose. Your notebook feels heavier, even though it is only paper. You flip through your earlier reports, the ones that used to end with a survivor. The pages look naive now, like they belonged to a kinder world. You make the next decision before you even park. You stop treating this offender as a prowler who sometimes rapes. You start treating him as a predator who is learning what he can get away with. That shift changes what you ask for and what you can justify. You ask for homicide resources, not because you like paperwork, but because you like breathing. You ask for more forensic processing time at every scene. You ask for tighter evidence packaging and better refrigeration for biological samples. You ask for the sort of things that sound boring in meetings and save cases decades later. The pushback is immediate. Because everything costs. And your offender cost the city something that is harder to measure. Sleep. You sit in another interagency room, and the tone is different now. The jokes die faster, and the coffee tastes more like ash. You lay out what you saw, and you watch the younger officers swallow. You do not dramatize it, because reality is already doing the work. You point to the control behaviors that survived the escalation. Ligatures from inside the house. Victims moved and managed, not just attacked. A scene that looks like someone had time to think. And you underline the worst part, the part that kills your optimism. The offender did not panic. He did not bolt at the first scream or the first unexpected noise. He stayed long enough to make choices. That is not rage. That is comfort. You get the predictable argument because humans cling to categories. Someone says, maybe it is a copycat. Someone says, maybe it is a different guy down south. Someone says, the newspapers are mixing stories for sales. You let them talk, then you bring it back to the evidence. You explain that a true copycat copies the loud parts, the mask, the threats, the headlines. This offender's loud parts are not what make him distinctive. His distinctive parts are quiet. Screens lifted, not broken. Knots tied fast. The phone disabled. The household items used as restraints and alarms and props. Those are habits, not costumes. You tell them you do not care what name the press uses. You care what the offender does when nobody is watching. And the room, reluctantly, starts nodding. Then comes the bureaucratic nightmare you knew was coming. Two series develop two identities because two regions develop two narratives. Up north, he is the East Area rapist. Down south, he becomes the original Night Stalker. Different task forces, different command chains, different file systems. Same kind of fear, stamped with different letterhead. You can feel the case splitting like wet wood. You fight it with the only weapon you have, comparison. You request photographs of bindings from the southern scenes. You request reports that describe entry points and exit routes. You request any preserved biological evidence, even if it is labeled under an old assault kit term. You start building what amounts to a private bridge made of photocopies and stubbornness. The first time you see the Southern reports, your stomach does that slow drop. The language is different, but the behavior is familiar. He enters the same way, through the back to the soft points of a home. He controls the couple, separating them by fear even when they are in the same room. He uses ligatures that feel improvised but land too clean to be improvisation. And after the murders, there is the same false burglary staging. Drawers opened, items moved, the house made to look like it was robbed. It is like watching him put on gloves after he has already touched everything. You take this to the people who can officially connect things, and you meet resistance. Not because the resistance is evil, because it is human. No supervisor wants to be the person who says, yes, our rapist is also your murderer. That sentence creates a monster with a longer reach, and it creates questions. How did we miss him? Why did we not stop him earlier? What do we tell the public? And the public, as you know, does not like honest answers. So the case sits in a kind of limbo, connected by gut feeling and partial paperwork. You keep pushing anyway because you have learned something about predators. They do not care if you are tired. They do not care if you are underfunded. They do not care if you have a meeting at 8. They care if you can name them, and you cannot. The next few years turn into a grim rhythm. Another attack, another scene, another terrified neighborhood. Then another murder, further south, and the quiet inside those houses is heavier. You start seeing the long arc of escalation, the way a person tests boundaries. First, he learns he can enter. Then he learns he can control. Then he learns he can leave. And then he learns he can take life and still leave. That is the lesson that keeps you awake, because it means he is not stumbling. He is progressing. You watch agencies throw tactics at the problem. Decoy operations, where couples pretend to sleep with officers nearby. Staking out greenbelts, with radios turned down and eyes burning from darkness. Public meetings, where frightened people ask you to guarantee what you cannot. And for a while, it feels like something might work. Then the offender slips again into the spaces between your efforts. You get false alarms at 2 in the morning and real calls at 4. You get tips that sound promising and suspects who do not fit. You get a man detained near a canal, sweating and angry, and he turns out to be a drunk who lost his wallet. You get another man whose shoe size matches, until you learn half the county wears the same brand. You learn, in a very personal way, the difference between a lead and a wish. The forensic work improves in small steps, and you cling to those steps like handholds. You start getting biological samples collected more consistently from scenes. Semen, saliva, skin cells, the awful little traces a human body leaves behind. It feels grotesque to talk about it like inventory, but that is the job. You cannot prosecute horror, you prosecute evidence. You send samples to labs, and the labs send back what they can. Sometimes it is blood type, back when blood type still felt like magic. Sometimes it is secretor status, whether the offender leaves blood group markers in body fluids. It narrows a universe down to a continent, and you pretend it helps. Then you start hearing the early whispers about deoxyribonucleic acid, and you feel hope try to rise. It is the late 1970s and early 1980s, and science is moving, but not fast. Your case is sprinting, and the lab is walking. You do what you can in the meantime, which is grind. You stack reports, you cross-reference, you chase down prowler calls from years earlier. You interview men who lived near the clusters. You interview men with burglary convictions, men with sex offenses, men with military backgrounds. You interview men because they are men, and you hate that the net is so wide. You sit across from suspects in rooms that smell like disinfectant and old sweat. You listen to alibis that are too polished and alibis that are too stupid. You learn that innocence and guilt can sound similar when someone is scared, and you keep coming back to the same dead truth. You do not have a face. You have a behavior. The offender goes quiet for stretches, and those stretches are their own cruelty. Silence makes people relax, then punishes them for relaxing. Silence makes task forces lose funding, because fear is not a line item. Silence makes you wonder if he died, or moved, or simply grew bored. You learn not to trust quiet. Quiet is what happens when a predator is thinking. When he resurfaces, it is in a place that makes you swear under your breath. Another southern scene? Another couple? Another house that should have been ordinary, the details come in, and you feel the same cold familiarity. The couple was home. They were restrained. The house was staged afterward. And once again, nobody lives to describe the voice. You stare at the report, and you realize something that makes you nauseous. The offender does not need to hear his victims talk anymore. He already knows what silence sounds like. You push harder for linkage, and you get the first real scientific lifeline. Labs begin to develop the ability to type deoxyribonucleic acid in a way that can compare offender to offender. Not to a named person, not yet, but to say this sample and that sample came from the same man. It is not the final answer, but it is a bridge across years. You preserve what you can because preservation becomes your new religion. You insist evidence be dried properly, packaged properly, stored properly. You fight the casual habits of earlier eras, the paper bags and damp swabs that breed mold. You annoy evidence clerks, and you do not apologize, because the future is going to judge your packaging. Eventually, the offender stops. Not officially, not with an announcement, just with absence. The calls slow, then vanish. The prowler reports continue. Because prowlers never stop existing, but the pattern shifts. Years pass, and no new confirmed attacks land on your desk with that same signature. You would like to feel relief. Instead, you feel stranded, because an ending without a name is not an ending. It is a pause you do not control. The case enters its long, cold middle, the part nobody puts on posters. You find yourself in evidence rooms more than crime scenes. You stand under fluorescent lights that make everything look sickly. You smell cardboard, dust, and the faint chemical tang of old packaging. This is where cases go when everyone gets older. They go into boxes, and they wait for a new idea to arrive, like a late train. You start learning the bureaucratic geography of the past. Which agency stored which kit? Which technician labeled a swab with what terminology? Which property room flooded? In what year? And what got moved in a hurry? You discover chain of custody problems that make your jaw clench. A box signed out and signed back in with missing initials. An envelope sealed with tape that dried and peeled. A sample stored in a way that makes you wonder if it is still usable. This is the part where you realize crime is not only committed by offenders, it is also committed by time. You keep working anyway, because the alternative is surrender. Deoxyribonucleic acid testing improves in waves, and you ride each wave like a tired surfer. First restriction fragment length polymorphism, which is a fancy way of saying it needs a lot of intact sample. Then short tandem repeat testing, which is a more practical kind of miracle. You learn the language, then translate it into human. Short tandem repeats are tiny repeated segments in your genetic code. They vary between people, and they can distinguish one person from another like a barcode. You send old samples for retesting when methods improve. Sometimes the lab calls back with good news. Sometimes they call back with the kind of news that makes you stare at the wall. Not enough sample. Too degraded. Contaminated. You learn to celebrate small victories because big ones are rare. One victory finally lands with weight. Profiles from different scenes begin to match each other. North and south assault and homicide, years apart, same deoxyribonucleic acid, same man. You sit with that confirmation and you feel two emotions at once. Vindication, because your gut was right, and grief, because a single man did all of this and he walked away for decades. The case now has a spine, a scientific linkage that can survive skepticism. It does not matter what the newspapers called him. It does not matter what each jurisdiction wanted to believe. The biology says it is one offender moving through time. That changes everything and nothing. Everything. Because now you can unify the files without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. Nothing. Because you still cannot name him. You take the link profile and you do what modern investigators do. You run it through the national database, the Combined Deoxyribonucleic Acid Index System. You wait for the hit that television promised your whole career. You get nothing. No offender match, no direct identity, just the quiet confirmation that he was never arrested for the right kind of offense, or never convicted, or never had his deoxyribonucleic acid collected. You stare at the screen and you feel the absurdity of it. A man can terrorize communities, and if he avoids a qualifying arrest, he stays a ghost. You update the case strategy because you have to. You start thinking about how people hide in plain sight. You look at the decades of his silence and wonder what he was doing. Raising kids, working a steady job, arguing with neighbors about fences, standing in line at hardware stores, buying rope for completely normal reasons. You hate how possible that is. You keep the case alive through persistence and paperwork, and you watch people retire out of it. Detectives who chased him in their 20s, now cleaning out desks in their 50s. Victims who gave statements with fresh fear, now older, carrying it like a chronic injury. You keep calling some of them back when a new test is done or a new link is confirmed. You hear exhaustion in their voices, and you do not blame them. You are tired too. The case becomes a kind of long-term relationship. With disappointment, you learn to speak in cautious language. Possible linkage? Probable match? Awaiting confirmation. You hate those phrases, but you use them because certainty is rare. Then the 2000 teens arrive, and with them, an uncomfortable reality. Technology has grown up, but the offender is still anonymous. Your old evidence is still your only bridge to him. Labs can now pull clearer short tandem repeat profiles from smaller samples. You retest again and you refine again until you have a profile you trust. You run it again through the official databases, again, and you get the same silence. This is the point where the case starts feeling like an insult. Not because you lack proof, because the proof cannot point to a human being. You sit in meetings where people start saying the phrase, "What else can we do?" And that phrase is dangerous because it is where desperate ideas are born. One of those ideas has been floating around in quiet circles like a rumor you do not want to repeat. Genetic genealogy. You have heard of it, the way you hear of experimental surgeries. It can save a life, but it can also leave scars. The concept is simple enough to sound like science fiction. Instead of looking for the offender in a criminal database, you look for his relatives in public genealogy databases. You use single nucleotide polymorphisms, which are tiny one-letter variations in the genetic code. They are not the same markers used in standard criminal profiling. They are broader, and they are what consumer ancestry companies use to tell you where your family came from. In human terms, you are turning a crime sample into a distant cousin finder. You talk it through with the team, and the room splits in a familiar way. Some people see it as the only realistic path. Some people see it as a legal and ethical minefield. Because it is. You are not only hunting an offender anymore, you are potentially pulling innocent relatives into a police investigation. Without their knowledge, you can do everything right and still harm people. And if you do it wrong, you can poison the case forever. You sit with that weight, and you feel the bitterness of it. The offender did not worry about ethics when he climbed fences. Now you have to worry about ethics to catch him. Still, the alternative is unacceptable. You cannot tell victims, "Sorry, we have his deoxyribonucleic acid, but we are out of ideas." That sentence is a slow second victimization. So, you move toward the gamble, carefully and deliberately. First, you need a sample that can be converted into a single nucleotide polymorphism profile. That means selecting biological evidence with enough quality left. After decades, you consult with lab scientists who speak in probabilities, because that is the only honest language they have. They tell you what might work and what will not. You authorize the testing because waiting has not worked. The lab produces a single nucleotide polymorphism profile that is usable. And now you face the irreversible step, where to compare it. You cannot upload it to the official criminal database because it is not built for that kind of data. You need a public-facing genealogy platform where users have opted into relative matching. You have legal discussions that feel like walking through fog with a flashlight. Warrants, policies, consent language, all of it shifting under your feet. You do not get to pretend it is simple. So you pick a platform where the rules are at least written down, even if they are imperfect. You watch the lab package the file like it is a live ember. A string of genetic letters, cleaned and formatted, ready to be compared against strangers who wanted to find cousins. You sign off on the upload, and it feels like stepping off a curb at night. Not because you do not see the street, but because you cannot see the car coming. This is the moment you stop hunting a suspect and start hunting a family. The screen refreshes, and you wait. Not dramatically, not with music swelling, just with that stale office air and an overworked computer fan. The first results come back as a list of names you have never heard. No mugshots, no rap sheets, just distant matches, third cousins and fourth cousins, the genetic equivalent of waving across a crowded stadium. Congratulations, you now have leads made of people who did nothing wrong. You do not get to kick down doors. You get to build a tree, branch by branch, using birth records, and you learn quickly that genealogy is not a hobby when lives are on the line. It is paperwork with teeth. You start with the strongest matches, because that is all you can do. Shared DNA, measured in tiny chunks. Centimorgans, a term that sounds like a railroad town. In human terms, it tells you how much genetic road you share with a stranger. More shared road means the offender is closer in the family map. You have analysts who live in spreadsheets now, and you sit beside them like a tired chaperone. They pull public records, family trees, marriage licenses, census data. They track name changes, adoptions, the old human habit of disappearing on paper. Every time the tree splits, you have to choose a branch. Choose wrong, and you waste months. Choose right, and you still waste weeks. Because families are messy. A man has children with one woman, then another, then moves to another state. A woman remarries, takes a new name, and now her line is hidden behind a different surname. Someone is listed as junior on one record and not on another. And the offender, wherever he is, benefits from all of it, because your search is only as clean as the records people left behind. You'll learn to appreciate death certificates the way other people appreciate vacation photos. Cause of death, place of birth, parents' names. A tiny summary of a life that helps you corner a monster. You keep your language careful in the room. You do not say, "This is the family." You say, "This is a possible cluster." You do not say, "We are close." You say, "We have a direction," because you have lived too long with disappointment to tempt it. The first real pivot comes when the same surnames start repeating across separate matches. Not one match pointing at one family, but multiple matches circling the same ancestral couple. That is when the work stops feeling like fishing and starts feeling like tracking. You draw it out, lines on paper, names written in cramped handwriting, a detective's version of a family portrait. 2 great-great-grandparents, then their children, then the children of those children. The branches get thick in the 1940s and 1950s when people had large families, and records are both better and worse. Better because the paper exists, worse because there are too many people to sort. You narrow by geography next, because crime always lives somewhere specific. The Golden State Killer did not hunt randomly across the continent. He hunted in California neighborhoods, near canals and green belts, near certain kinds of tract houses. So you take the family branches and you look for who lived in California at the right time. Then you apply age, because biology has limits. A man committing these assaults in the late 1970s is not likely to be 70 at the time. Not impossible, but unlikely. You want a man born in the right decade, old enough to move confidently, young enough to sprint fences. You start building what looks like a suspect list, but it is not. It is a candidate list built from ancestry, a strange and uncomfortable sentence. The list is not dozens at first. It is hundreds, because families spread like spilled ink. And then the hard part begins. You cannot investigate hundreds of people the same way. You have to triage the way hospitals do when the room is full. You look for behavioral fit. Did any of these men have law enforcement connections? Did any have military service? Did any live near Sacramento in the late 1970s? Did any move south around the time the attacks shifted? And that is when you see how thin the line is between clever work and confirmation bias. Because if you want to see a pattern badly enough, you will see it everywhere. So you force yourself to build disqualifiers, not just qualifiers. If a man was overseas during key attacks, cross him off. If he lived on the wrong coast, cross him off. If he was too young, too old, incarcerated, dead, cross him off. You do it methodically, like shaving down a block of wood. Days turn into weeks. The room becomes a rotating shift of exhausted people staring at family trees. It is not glamorous, and it is not cinematic. It is a slow siege against anonymity. Then, the tree tightens. Not with a bang, but with the quiet relief of fewer names on the board. A cluster of relatives keeps pulling you back to the same line, the same California roots. A set of brothers, cousins, second cousins, all connected to an ancestral couple. From there, you move forward in time, because you are no longer looking for the ancestor. You are looking for the living man who inherited the DNA and turned it into terror. You cross-reference addresses, employment histories, anything public that can give you a shadow of a timeline, and you feel the investigation becoming cruelly domestic. You are not picturing a masked prowler anymore. You are picturing a man buying groceries, paying taxes, attending barbecues. That is when the name starts to appear more than once in the narrowed work. Joseph James D'Angelo, a name that sounds like it belongs on a mailbox, not in a case file that has eaten 40 years. You do not let yourself latch on too hard, because names have tricked you before. So you do what you always do. You test the fit. He is born in the right time frame. He lived in California. He has a law enforcement background, which makes your earlier suspicion feel less like paranoia and more like nausea. He worked as a police officer, then later as an officer in a different area. You start lining up his known residences with the attack geography. It is not perfect at first, because nothing ever is, but the overlaps are uncomfortable, close enough to make your spine stiffen, close enough that you can imagine him learning patrol habits from the inside, close enough that your old question, how does he know he has time, gets a possible answer. You dig into employment records, disciplinary records, any hint of behavior that suggests control, anger, entitlement. You find a history of trouble in his law enforcement career, the kind that reads as petty until you remember the scale of what you are hunting. A shoplifting incident, a firing, the collapse of a respectable path, and you picture it, the quiet humiliation curdling into something else. You do not say, "This made him do it." You do not get to simplify evil like that. But you do note it, because offenders have trajectories too. They just hide them behind uniforms and pay stubs. Now comes the part where you have to turn genealogy into proof that will survive court. A family tree is not evidence of guilt. It is a map to possible guilt. The only thing that closes the loop is a direct DNA comparison, crime scene sample to suspect sample. And you cannot knock on his door and ask for a cheek swab, not without tipping him off, not without risking destruction of evidence, not without risking him running. You decide on surveillance. Old-fashioned, patient, boring, expensive. Because once you have a name, you do not get to act like you're in a hurry. You get to act like you are certain. And certainty requires proof. So you put eyes on him. Covert teams, rotating, watching a man who looks like any other aging retiree. You sit in a car down the street, engine off, window cracked, watching him step out to check his mail. The sun is still up, and that feels wrong, because you have only known him in darkness. He walks with the slow stiffness of age. He wears ordinary clothes. He does not look like a headline, and that is the most disturbing part, because monsters rarely do. You watch him do errands. Grocery store, hardware store, a quiet drive-through neighborhoods where people have no idea what their street is adjacent to. You listen to radio chatter that is deliberately calm. Nobody wants to spook him, and nobody wants to say too much out loud, because you are surveilling a former cop, and former cops know what surveillance looks like. They know the rhythm of it, the awkward way cars rotate, the accidental eye contact at stoplights. So you are careful. You park far, you switch vehicles. You trade positions like a slow dance, practiced and unromantic. Now you need the critical thing, his DNA, without his cooperation. So you wait for what people always leave behind: trash, a tissue, a napkin, a paper cup. It is humiliating in a way that decades of terror might end because a man threw away a used item. But criminals, even careful ones, are still human. They shed, they bleed, they leave little pieces of themselves everywhere, like bad habits. The decision is made for a trash pull, legally timed, collected from where it is considered abandoned. You wait for pickup day like it is a holiday you hate. The team moves in when the bins are out, when the rules say they can. You collect, you bag, you label, you document chain of custody, like your life depends on it, because it does. If the evidence is mishandled here, the defense will not have to argue innocence. They will argue contamination, and the jury will hear doubt. The samples go to the lab, and now you wait in the oldest way, not for a prowler call, not for a victim statement, but for a technician to run a comparison. This is the modern version of staring at a phone, willing it to ring. Days crawl. You keep watching D'Angelo while the lab works, because you cannot stop now. You watch him stand in his driveway. You watch him tinker with something in the garage. You watch him exist, unbothered, while you carry the weight of his past like a backpack full of bricks. And you cannot help yourself. You imagine him younger, moving through Sacramento backyards, listening to sprinklers, lifting screens. You imagine those same hands, now older, picking up groceries. You imagine the same mind, the one that used dishes as alarms, now doing crossword puzzles. You do not get to resolve that cognitive dissonance. You just have to live inside it long enough to finish the job. The lab call comes in without ceremony because lab people do not do drama. They speak in match statistics and confirmed profiles. They tell you the DNA from the discarded item matches the crime scene profile. It is him, not a cousin, not a branch, not a theory, a direct match. And for a second, you feel something like vertigo, because the case that lived in boxes just became a living man you can handcuff. Congratulations, the ghost has a pulse. Now you have to arrest him without giving him a chance to become smoke again. You plan it like a small military operation, because you do not arrest a former cop casually. You assume he has weapons. You assume he has escape instincts. You assume he has contingencies. You coordinate teams. You write warrants. You line up search protocols. You think about the house. What might be inside after all these years? Souvenirs, old weapons, maps, notes, or nothing, because smart offenders purge. You decide you will treat every object like it matters, and every minute like it might be the one he uses to destroy something. The day of the arrest, you are back in that familiar posture, sitting and waiting, but the setting is modern suburbia, not a canal path. You are parked in the dark, watching a quiet street where nobody is screaming. The radio is low. The air in the car tastes like stale breath and old coffee. You watch him step out, an older man moving through routine. This is what evil looks like when it is not performing. Just a person. Then the teens move. It is quick, because it has to be. Officers approach, commands issued, hands controlled, body turned, cuffs applied. You hear the sharpness in voices, the way professionals get when they are not taking chances. D'Angelo reacts like a man who understands exactly what is happening. No confusion, no innocent outrage that feels genuine. Just a kind of startled anger, contained. A man who thought the past had aged out. You watch him go down, and you think about all the nights he made other people lie down. It does not feel like victory. It feels like the end of a long fever. Now the search begins. You serve warrants on his home, because arrests are only the start in cases like this. You walk into his house with the same cautious steps you used in Sacramento decades ago. But the atmosphere is different. This is not a fresh crime scene. This is a lived-in space, a place with furniture chosen for comfort. You smell cooking residue, old carpet, the ordinary scent of someone aging in place. And you try not to let that ordinariness soften your focus. You photograph, you catalog, you bag potential evidence. You look for anything that links him behaviorally, not just biologically. Weapons, ammunition, items that do not belong, old jewelry, photographs. You do not always find the cinematic trove people imagine, because real offenders, the ones who last, learn to keep their trophies small or hidden or gone. But you do find enough to keep digging, and you already have the one thing you needed to turn the case in court. His DNA matched directly. That is the anchor. Now everything else becomes corroboration. The arrest hits the public like an electrical surge. News crews swarm. Old victims get phone calls they never expected to receive again. Some cry, some go silent. Some get angry, because anger is easier than reopening a locked room inside your mind. You sit with survivors who are now older, some with gray hair, some with grandchildren, and you tell them the name, not the nickname, not the monster title, a plain name. And you watch their faces do something complicated. Relief, disgust, disbelief, grief, all at once. Because a name does not give you back what was taken. It just makes the shape of the theft clearer. You also watch communities react the way they always do. People look at his neighborhood and ask, how did no one know? As if evil wears a bright coat. As if the neighbor who waves while taking out trash is obligated to disclose his private history of violence. But you know how it happens. It happens because people are tired. It happens because he stopped. It happens because time convinces everyone that the worst days are over. Then the legal process starts, and the pace shifts again. Arrests feel fast. Court is slow, and it is supposed to be. Now you are no longer chasing him through backyards. You are chasing him through motions, filings, hearings, schedules, and procedural rights that exist for good reasons. And you sit in rooms where lawyers argue about evidence from decades ago. You hear terms like statute of limitations, and it makes your jaw tighten. Because time is not only the thing that hit him, time is now the thing that limits what you can charge. Many of the rapes, depending on the era and the jurisdiction, face legal complications. Not because they were not real, because lawmakers did not imagine a world where a case could be proven 40 years later. So charges focus where they can. Murders, certain kidnappings, crimes with no expiration. It is an ugly compromise, and you watch families absorb it differently. Some want any accountability. Some want full accounting. Every assault named and spoken in open court. And you understand both because you have been living with this file too long to believe in perfect outcomes. Still, the prosecution has a strategy. They have the DNA. They have the linked series. They have enough to put him in a courtroom and keep him there. And then, another pivot, a plea. D'Angelo agrees to plead guilty to multiple murders and admit to other crimes in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. You watch the reaction ripple. Relief for some, because trials can be brutal and victims do not want to spend years reliving every detail. Anger for others, because death feels like the only proportional thing. And you, the weary detective in the middle, see it for what it is, a legal trade made to secure certainty. Certainty is the currency you spend when you are too tired to gamble anymore. You sit in the courtroom and feel how unromantic closure really is. There is no dramatic reveal, just paperwork being read out loud in a measured voice, charge by charge, date by date, county by county, a life's worth of violence reduced to sentences. And you listen for the thing you think you want, the motive, the why, the grand explanation. You do not get it. You get admissions. You get yes. You get guilty. You get a man saying the words with the flat affect of someone reading a grocery list. Congratulations, you caught the monster, and he still refuses to be interesting. When he speaks, it is not to illuminate anything. It is to end the process with the least possible cost to himself. That is how predators age, not into wisdom, but into efficiency. The prosecutors walk the court through the backbone evidence, the DNA profile that links assaults and murders across decades, the direct match to the discarded sample, collected legally, sealed carefully, tested cleanly, the old case files that finally get to sit in the same room instead of separate basements, and you can feel the whole system exhale because the proof is not fragile anymore. Then the victim impact statements begin, and the air changes. This is where the case stops being a forensic triumph and becomes a human ledger. You watch people approach the microphone like it is a cliff edge. Some speak with a calm that scares you, the kind that only comes from long practice. Some cannot get through a sentence without the past tightening around their throat. You hear the same theme in different voices, the way a single offender can fork 1,000 lives. They talk about moving houses, changing locks, sleeping with lights on for years. They talk about marriages that did not survive because trauma does not stay in one room. They talk about becoming their own security systems, always listening for a sound that does not belong. And you realize the case was never just about the night of the assault. It was about the decades after, the quiet adaptations, the permanent rewiring. You watch D'Angelo sit there while they speak, and you look for a reaction, not because you need drama, but because you want evidence of comprehension. Most of what you see is stillness, a blink, a jaw set, a man choosing absence as his final defense. It lands like a second insult because it means the system can make him admit, but it cannot make him understand. Sentencing arrives with the same slow inevitability as winter. Multiple life sentences, stacked until the math becomes symbolic, a legal way of saying, you will never again be unsupervised in a normal room. You hear the judge's words, and you feel that strange split inside yourself. Relief because the threat is finally caged, and something like grief because the cage comes after the damage, not before it. Outside, reporters cluster, microphones out, hungry for a quote that sounds like an ending. You keep walking because you have learned endings are for headlines. In real work, you still have to tidy the wreckage. Back at the office, the case turns into a different kind of burden. Not pursuit, but accounting. You pull old reports and ask the questions nobody wants to answer. Which incidents were never officially linked because evidence was lost? Which kits were never tested because funding ran dry? Which victims never reported at all? Because shame is a better silencer than duct tape. You begin the quiet after-action review that every big case deserves, and almost none receive. What did you preserve well? What did you package wrong? What did you fail to share across borders because pride got in the way? And what did the offender exploit simply by being patient? You sit with an evidence clerk and look at labels written in old handwriting, dates faded, ink softened by time, an entire era sealed in cardboard. You think about how close the case came to dying in a storage room, if a box got wet, if a freezer failed, if a clerk tossed something during a move because it looked like junk. The case was solved by science, sure, but it was saved by stubborn people who refused to throw things away. That becomes one of the case's real lessons, and it is annoyingly practical. Preserve everything, even when you are sure you will not need it, because your certainty is the first thing the future laughs at. Then comes the wider consequence, the one that does not fit neatly into a courtroom transcript. Genetic genealogy worked. It worked so well that it makes every agency in the country start eyeing their cold cases like locked doors. You can almost hear the thinking, if we have DNA, we can do this too. And maybe you can, but you also feel the weight of what was normalized. A public database used for private family curiosity became a hunting ground for law enforcement. It solved a case that devoured decades, and it opened an ethical argument that will outlive this conviction. You sit in meetings where administrators talk about policy like it is a seatbelt, opt-in consent, search restrictions, oversight, training, and you know from experience that policy is often written after the crash. You think about the innocent relatives who matched, whose names were pulled into spreadsheets without their knowledge. They did nothing wrong but share ancestry with a man who did everything wrong. That is the cost of this method, and you do not get to pretend the cost is imaginary. At the same time, you picture the alternative. Another decade of survivors aging out of hope, while a predator dies in his own bed, unnamed. You do not get a clean moral equation here. You get trade-offs measured in privacy and justice, and the simple human need to stop a ghost. In the months after sentencing, you watch people search for meaning in the offender's ordinary life. Neighbors talk about him as a grumpy guy, a man who kept to himself, a person who did not stand out. Family members face the public's favorite lazy question: how did you not know? You hate that question because it assumes evil is loud at breakfast. Most of the time, it is quiet, routine, and strategic. Predators do not survive decades by performing in daylight. They survive by blending into it. You also see another uncomfortable truth surface. One the public does not enjoy. He was a police officer. Not a rumor, not a theory, a documented fact. So now, agencies have to swallow their own bitter medicine. Background checks did not catch him. Culture did not restrain him. The badge did not purify him. It just gave him proximity to methods and response patterns. You watch departments do the careful language dance, insisting he was an outlier. Maybe he was, but he was also proof that power attracts people who want it for the wrong reasons. And that is not a comfortable lesson, which means it will be resisted. You go back through the timeline one last time because your brain insists on it. You overlay his known residences, his employment changes, and the shifting geography of the crimes. You see how the attacks move the way a working man might move, not randomly, but logistically. You see how the escalation aligns with confidence and opportunity, not with sudden insanity. And you cannot stop thinking about the years he went quiet. The years where there are no confirmed attacks, just a man living his life on paper. You ask yourself the question you would never ask on camera if you wanted to sleep. Was he truly done, or did he simply stop where evidence could connect him? You do not get an answer, because absence is not proof. It is just absence. Investigators continue to sift through suspected linked cases, old prowler reports, assaults with similar control behaviors. Some can be ruled out with DNA, some cannot, because the evidence is gone, or never collected, or never stored right. In those gaps, uncertainty lives like mold. A few families will always wonder if their case was part of his trail. A few survivors will always wonder if they were one of the ones he never admitted to, because plea deals consolidate what you can prove, not everything that happened. That is another reality check, and it is not a comforting one. Justice is not the full story. Justice is the portion of the story that meets the court's standards and survives time's erosion. You keep thinking about the earliest days, the screens lifted cleanly and set aside, how small the clues were, and how heavy the consequences became. A lifted screen is a nothing event until it is the start of a 40-year nightmare. A hang-up call is a nuisance until it is a pre-attack ritual. A shoe print in dust is not dramatic until it is the only footprint a ghost ever gives you. And you think about the detectives who did not live to see the arrest, the ones who chased him with paper maps and instinct, who argued across jurisdictions, who boxed evidence, and hoped. Their work did not solve it, not directly, but it kept the case alive long enough for the future to arrive. That is the part the public misses, because the public wants a genius moment. In reality, the case was cracked by endurance and by a science tool nobody in 1978 could have described. Now, in the quiet that follows, you sit with the final uncomfortable lesson. Catching him did not undo what he did. It simply stopped the uncertainty from continuing to breed. Survivors still carry nights that do not end. Families still carry empty chairs that do not refill. And you still carry the knowledge that a man can do this, then go home and mow his lawn. You file the last of the paperwork, because paperwork is how the world acknowledges suffering. You place the case materials where they will live now, not in a forgotten box, but in an archive built to outlast your career. You make notes for future investigators because you finally understand your role in time. Not hero, not savior, just a relay runner handing off to better tools and younger hands. When the building empties and the lights hum in the hallway, you stand for a moment and listen. You hear nothing but ventilation and distance traffic. The quiet is still there, but it is a different kind now. Not staged, not predatory, just the ordinary silence of a system that once in a while, manages to catch up, and as you lock the door behind you, you cannot stop the last thought from following you into the dark. If